Good morning, everybody. My name is Max Steyer. I'm the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization focused on making the federal government work better. Our view is that a better government leads to a stronger democracy, and our work on the presidential transition is a core element of what we do at the organization. We are celebrating now our 20th anniversary. We have been active in all kinds of areas, including trying to get great talent into government, trying to help the leaders that are in government today, and trying to share the stories of amazing things that public servants are doing. The Center for Presidential Transition is work that we began in the 2008 election cycle. We recognized that it was fundamental to the health of our government that it start right, and that we learned as children that a peaceful transfer of power is one of the things that our country gave to the world. What we didn't learn so much about was that it's been peaceful, but not always pretty, often ugly. And our theory of the case was that we needed to create a learning system so that we could make sure that that handoff of power was done even better. So it's my great pleasure to have a number of people on our panel today that have been helpful to the work of the Center for Presidential Transition from the get-go. But before getting there, I want to thank in particular the Boston Consulting Group that has been just a phenomenal partner to us. Beginning in 2012, we have a number of representatives from BCG with us who have been shoulder to shoulder with us in this work in very powerful ways, including Sharon Marceau, who leads the North America practice for BCG, is a member of our board and a long time friend of the organization. We also have Mel Wolfgang, who likewise has been an early supporter of this work, and Brooke Boyke and Troy Thomas, who you'll hear from in a couple of minutes. Before jumping into the substance of the work that we've done here, I want to give just a little more context on this work. We, every cycle, try to do a review of what happened with an effort of trying to understand what we can improve going forward, both operationally for the relevant parties, but also structurally. And we've been very successful in working with others to improve the actual process of transition planning in very consequential ways. And no person has been more powerful in doing that than one of our key panelists here, Senator Ted Kaufman. Senator Kaufman is an extraordinary public servant, somebody who has deep understanding of our government and of the Senate, and has really been an extraordinary, architect of the modern transition process. No one could have been better for the Biden team to lead that effort, and he did an exceptional job. We are also blessed with one of my media heroes, Judy Woodruff, who will be moderating this panel. There is no journalist that I'm aware of who better represents a thorough and nonpartisan and insightful perspective on the news of the day. And we are really lucky to have her organizing the conversation. We have Governor Chris Christie, who I think did a phenomenal job in the run-up to the 2016 election in putting together a great transition process. And then Ann Joseph O'Connell, who is an extraordinary expert from Stanford Law School, my alma mater, on all things regarding the leadership of our government and the nomination process. So you really are in for an incredible conversation coming up here. We have many people from the partnership world that have also helped with this. I want to specifically single out Dan Tangerlini, another one of our board members who has been instrumental in the work of the report that you'll learn more from Valerie about shortly here. We also have additional board members, Tom Bernstein, our chair, Dave Kapos, Les Lyles, General Lyles, George Weldy, and from our advisory board for transition work, Mac McClarty, who again has been a tremendous public servant. And finally, I want to thank a set of folks that are at the partnership itself, beginning with Shannon Carroll, Carla Scalina, Kara Glancy, who is running the logistics of this effort here, Paul Hitlin, and Dan Hyman, and then someone you'll be hearing from as well, Valerie Boyd, who is our new leader of our Center for Presidential Transition, and is herself a public servant who comes from the national security world. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn the virtual podium over to Troy Thomas, who again has been an exceptional partner from BCG, himself, again, a public servant of many years in the national security world, and Look forward to hearing what Troy has to share. Thank you so much and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Max. On behalf of BCG, I just really want to thank the partnership and the entire Center for Presidential Transition team for the opportunity to support this important work, as we have for many years. And this report that we're going to talk about today, I think, continues a really important tradition of the center capturing the most important lessons learned after each transition and really preparing credible recommendations for how we can do it better, both to safeguard this hallmark of our democracy, the transition of power. In reading it, I think, one thing that comes out to me is that we have a lot of strengths to build on, to include the exceptional professionalism of the public servants in the department and agencies who responsibly prepare for transition every time. And the key agencies like the FBI and GSA who provide essential services to the transition. And always the incoming team, and in this case, the Biden team, who set new standards for how to prepare for an effective transition and take on the awesome responsibility of governing our nation. But this is not enough, as we well know, and there are challenges, and there's a lot more we can do, and there's really great ideas in here that we're going to get to talk about today. This report makes that clear. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion personally, and I would like to now hand it over to my former White House colleague and the director of the center, Valerie Boyd.
Thanks, Troy, and thank you for BCG's leadership and partnership on transition planning and this report. Our report offers a narrative record of planning before and after the 2020 election, and it also offers recommendations for transition practitioners to strengthen the system. It begins with 7 major findings for the broader public to take away. The first theme has received the most public attention so far, which is that the incumbent president is critical to a successful transition process. There was a cadre in the White House led by Deputy Chief of Staff Chris Liddell that did good work on planning and information sharing. But President Trump's reaction to the election results was the defining factor in making 2020 the most challenging transition in modern history. Theme 2 is that the Biden transition team foresaw that increasing delays in the Senate confirmation process would make it challenging to get their team in place, so they organized their personnel operation to work around it. Even with this best possible planning, the rate of confirmed appointees has continued to decrease, and we need to reform the confirmation process so that future presidents of any party can swiftly get their teams in place. Theme 3, the Biden team also predicted that they should plan ahead for a variety of possible delays. This allowed some work to continue despite the delay in finalizing the election results. A range of modern challenges will make this important for future transition teams. Theme 4, transition teams should plan to retain key personnel after Inauguration Day and organize the mechanics for their policy plans to reach the people who ultimately will have the responsibility to enact them. Theme 5, the strength of the federal workforce, particularly Mary Joubert, the career transition director at GSA, was a critical part of what went well, as Troy said. Theme 6, this was the first transition to be conducted entirely remotely, which allowed participation from experts across the country, but also led to administrative and collaboration challenges. So there are some opportunities to continue to build on the success, but also look at how that could work better. And then theme 7 is that the peaceful transfer of power is not an issue that should divide us. From whatever seat we're in, we should support it. So let's quickly highlight just a few of the specific recommendations for transition practitioners. Some of these are best practices that we've known for a while others have new importance today. So starting with the recommendations for Congress, Congress should play a role in reducing the overall number of political appointees, particularly in Senate confirmed positions. This is the best way to help presidents quickly get their teams in place. Second, Congress should consider how the path to nomination and appointment can be streamlined for key positions. 3, we should review how federal agencies can better share information with candidates in case of another delay in finalizing election results. Another way to think of this is to make ascertainment less consequential. 4, ensure that the agencies conducting background investigations and reviewing ethics and financial disclosures are adequately resourced. So the recommendations for the White House overall reiterate some longstanding expectations for a candidate who is also in the White House. Issues like COVID-19 and the 2008 economic recovery require close cooperation across teams. In our report, we suggest that the Career Federal Transition Coordinator could play a role in defining these issues in an election year. Incumbents have a responsibility to support the president-elect's planning, and they also have a responsibility to plan their own priorities and personnel for a second term. The 4th recommendation here is about streamlining the personnel process and making it easier to make nominations and appointments. There's a heavy paperwork burden on nominees, and an integrated federal dashboard could expedite applications and review. Moving on to transition teams, we have the most recommendations in our report for transition teams, and they're briefly summarized here, highlighting some of the best practices that the Biden team well represented. As we'll hear from Senator Kaufman, the Biden team organized early and deferred to the campaign to set the agenda for the overall policy planning. Transition teams should use the pre-election period to assess which priority appointments to fill first. And as mentioned earlier, they should prepare for many different contingencies and scenarios, including the modern challenges of cybersecurity threats, increased political polarization, and a variety of operational and national security events that might occur during the transition. So finally, moving on to federal agencies. As we've said a few times already, this is one of the great strengths of this system. By law, there is an Agency Transition Directors Council who should continue to use the lessons learned from previous transitions and organize around the best practices that they've learned so far. They should develop concise briefing materials that are focused on the issues facing incoming leaders and engage in responsible succession planning and share those succession plans of acting career officials with the transition teams. So that was just a few brief highlights of the report that we put out this morning. And I'm honored to turn the discussion over to Judy Woodruff to lead our panel discussion. Judy needs no introduction, but as Max said, she's a close friend and partner and leader in the journalism field, a familiar face from her many years of bringing us the nightly news. She's the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, where she's been the sole anchor since 2013. And she's covered politics and other news for decades at NBC, CNN, and PBS. We are very fortunate to have her with us today to moderate this important discussion on presidential transition. So Judy, over to you.
Valerie, thank you very much. And thank you to you and to Max for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. To me, there are few things more symbolic and more essential to our democracy than the peaceful transition of power. And that's why talking about this transition is so important. It may not be in the headlines right this minute, but it matters. It certainly has mattered to our country over the last year. It continues to have repercussions. And I'm just so very glad to be part of this conversation. And I'm especially pleased to introduce 3 people who are uniquely qualified to talk about the subject. I want to welcome first the former United States Senator, you heard Max mention him a minute ago, from the state of Delaware, Ted Kaufman. He was co-chair of the Biden-Harris transition team last year. He has been a close friend and advisor to President Biden for, I guess, half a century, 50 years, since Mr. Biden's first run for the Senate. So Senator Kaufman, welcome. Next, the former 2-term governor of the state of New Jersey, Chris Christie. He did serve for a time as chair of the Trump transition team in 2016. He served in that role for 6 months from May of 2016 until shortly after the election that year. And our third panelist is Ann Joseph O'Connell. She is both the Adelbert H. Sweet Professor of Law at Stanford University Law School. She's also a social scientist. Her award-winning research and teaching focuses on administrative law and the federal bureaucracy. So welcome to all three of you. We're very glad to have you. And I just want to start by asking each one of you, I'm going to go to Senator Kaufman first. What is your basic reaction when you read this report? What did you think, Senator?
I think it's great. Of course, I'm prejudiced. I've been working with the partnership since they started this in 2008. So it's not, I really think they did a great job. I especially think they kind of pointed out something that should be pointed out, how we got in this mess with the confirmations. I mean, every year, every 4 years, practically, the number of people, the difficulty getting confirmations goes up. And depending on what the difference is between the House and the Senate in terms of party, it's terrible, because you need these, especially now, especially in national security area. We have 40 some, we held up like 40 some ambassadors because someone was concerned about the pipeline, which is important. But we needed those ambassadors over in the country. So I think confirmation process, the report points that out, really important. Vetting and disclosure needs to be updated. Reduce the number of appointments, needs Senate confirmation. Absolutely is number one. Number two is, I think that a better definition of the role of the incumbent, which Valerie pointed out, that administration, ascertainment, fewer agencies requiring ascertainment. That's an excellent thing. And finally, there's a bunch, by the way, there are a bunch of good ones, but these are the three that really got to me. One is more funds for the agencies heavily involved in the transition: FBI, Ethics, GSA, Office of Presidential Personnel, and Department of Justice. I mean, this is, as you said, Judy, this is really, really, really important stuff. And we're not putting them, we're putting more money than we used to, but we need to put even more money in these folks because they can do their job during the transition.
Governor Christie, what's your main takeaway?
Well, look, I agree with a lot of the things that Ted said, Judy, and but I also think that the regular interaction between the folks on the outside and the folks in the White House being even more memorialized and required would be very important. It's not as if you turn a light switch off and then turn a light switch on. These problems, issues, and challenges continue. They don't care about our transition period. They want attention paid to them. And I think that the recommendation that tabletop exercises be done and emergency preparedness exercises be done with the people identified by the incoming administration, potentially, and by the current or outgoing administration, depending upon the situation, is really important in addition to the ones that Ted mentioned. I will say that the vetting process and the confirmation process is incredibly difficult. And that's why I don't want to repeat what Ted said, but I agree with him on that wholeheartedly.
And Governor Christie, your audio for me is a little low. I don't know if that's just me, my computer, but if there's anything you can do to turn it up, that would be great.
We'll try.
Thank you. And Professor O'Connell, give us your sense of this.
Thank you, Judy. It's so easy to focus on overall numbers, number of nominations, number of confirmations, withdrawals, returns. And I think what the report does is get us out of the horse race perspective on political appointments and show systematic problems across administrations. I think I was struck most by two things. The first was the detailed accounting of the last transition and just all the myriad of issues that the Biden-Harris transition confronted and how difficult that transition was. And then second, as the senator and governor remarked, was we have a set of nonpartisan, compelling, sensible recommendations that would benefit presidents from the left and the right in terms of getting their teams in place, and maybe we can make some headway. We made some headway in 2012 in terms of cutting the number of Senate confirmed positions, but not since then.
All right, thank you all three. I want to talk first, and let's do this chronologically, but I want to talk first about the pre-election period. Senator Kaufman, you were in a situation where every day you were leading the transition team while in the news a campaign was raging. What was your guidebook as you were thinking about the transition? Did you already know kind of how you wanted to organize this and execute, or did you make it up along the way? Tell us how that went.
No, I think we kind of know. I think, look, the two key things to a successful transition in my mind is timing and talent. So timing is really, really important. And what we did was in March, we sat down with Dave Marchick and Dan Hyman from the partnership and talked through what was going to come up in the transition with them. And then in April, then presidential candidate Biden called me and said, let's sit down and start talking about the transition, because he understood how incredibly important the transition was. So that was helpful for us. So Mark Edenstein and I sat down with the president, and he gave us 2 days in which to kind of lay out what we'd already prepared things. So we weren't starting from scratch, but laid out what it is that he wanted to do and how we were going to communicate. Once you get in a transition, communicating with a candidate is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just, again, we'll get into this later on how important the relations are between the campaign and the transition. But clearly, you're not going to get that time later on. After talking about that, the next thing we went to was talent, because talent's really key. I mean, it's really, in everything we do, talent's key, but in this especially, it's talent. And after talking to a bunch of folks who were involved in the rest of it, we presented the idea of Jeff Zients to run the whole operation. And Jeff's incredible. I mean, he's one of the, I worked a lot of wonderful managers over the last 50 years in everything. And Jeff's one of the top people. He was the head of OMB. He was the head of the NSC in the White House. He just knows how to organize things. And the president-elect was really happy with Jeff. He had experience with Jeff, obviously, in the White House, and he thought he was an excellent choice. And then the next thing was Jeff went out and picked Yo Abraham. I don't know how many of you know Johannes Abraham, but he had a lot of great positions in the Obama administration, and also is teaching at Harvard. When I told people that Yo was going to work in the campaign, it was amazing. Uniformly, people said, "Oh, Yo, he leaps tall buildings at a single bound." I mean, he is just so incredibly talented. And then they went out and they picked 5 really talented people to report to them. And Susie George, I don't know if you know Susie, but she's wonderful. She was the head of all the non-confirmable personnel, which was incredibly important under our plan. But also the confirmed positions were very, very important. And we got Lisa Monaco, who's wonderful to do that. Avril Haines came in and did the foreign policy and national security transition personnel, who was going to be in it, how we were going to organize it. Cecilia Munez, who's another one, incredible person. She took over the domestic policy transition and personnel. And then Jess Hertz came to work for us as the general counsel.
Well, and thank you, Senator Kaufman. Governor Christie, you were, as we said, you ran the transition for candidate Donald Trump in 2016, a very different situation. We knew the incumbent President Obama was leaving. This was a matter of what was in the news every day was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump at that point, once he secured the nomination. Talk about, how that process unfolded. You took over the transition in May, and we can talk later about what happened later. But during that period, did you have a guidebook for what you were going to do? I mean, who did you turn to? What did you rely on?
Well, a few things, Judy. First, as I recall, I took it over in April, and what I did first was recruit an executive director. And we then began to recruit other folks to run all the different areas of a transition. Next, I went to consult with all of the Republican folks who had been involved with transitions previously. I met with Jim Baker. I met with Vice President Cheney. We met with John McCain's team. We met with Mitt Romney's team. And I took from each one of them the things that they thought had gone well and had gone poorly in their planning. And that's the way we kind of put together our guidebook, was by talking to all these folks. I had extensive meetings with them. Most of them were 2 to 3 hour meetings where I just sat there and took them was a sponge about the things that they had actually gone through. And the great thing, especially about talking with Baker and Cheney, was they had obviously then went on to serve in those White Houses and knew what what had served them well in the transition and what had been a waste of time. So that's the way we set up our guidebook. It was different, obviously, than this last one because President Obama was leaving. And so we had really wonderful cooperation from the Obama administration. They gave us access to everything that we asked to have access for that was appropriate. We met with them regularly, and we had regular phone conversations with them as well. I think Ted is right that talent is important, and we recruited people in the same way he did, and then also we had recruited hundreds of people to be on landing teams in each one of the departments and agencies that had particular expertise in those areas that would be ready to go in right after the election to assess what was going on, work with their Obama administration predecessors so that there would be a seamless flow of information in each one of those areas. And that's the way we put it together. Lastly, and I know we'll go into this a little more later, but in terms of working with the campaign, we set up weekly meetings with the campaign in New York at Trump Tower. So we would meet with the campaign, senior campaign people every Monday. We would provide them with written reports and agendas on the Friday before. So they knew what we had done in the last week, what we were planning and hoping to do in the next week, so that we could get sign off and approval from the campaign or amendments to it on that Monday, and then go immediately down to the team in Washington to begin the work for that week and the planning for the next week. And those meetings went on starting in early June, and our last meeting of the pre-election team was on the day before the election. So it was, I think, a very thorough process, very organized, both from our perspective and from the perspective of the interaction we had with the Obama administration.
And then, as we know, in the days after the election, the newly elected president opted to put somebody else in charge of the transition. There was a changeover. How much did that hamper, or how much did it affect what the incoming President Trump was able to do coming in?
Your first adjective was more appropriate. Hamper was exactly right. Look, it was devastating when you look back on it to the incoming administration. Basically what they did was, with the president-elect's permission, they removed all of the leadership of the transition that had been doing this from April until November, despite the fact that they had approved every bit of what we had done from April to November, as you just mentioned, on a week-to-week basis. And not only that, they discarded all of the work that we did. So we had 20 volumes of work that we had done with everything from day-to-day planning for the first 100 days, executive orders drafted and reviewed by the Justice Department, cabinet level appointment people vetted. We brought in an entire team of former United States attorneys from the Bush 43 administration who conducted the vetting of potential cabinet and sub-cabinet people, and their reports were all included and discarded. And so really they went from a 20-volume plan to move from election to inauguration and to the first 100 days of the administration to a blank piece of paper. And this was the inexperience of the Trump campaign and of the candidate himself in understanding just how complex it was going to be to become president of the United States and to manage this enormous enterprise, when the most that these folks, most of them from the Trump organization, had done before was run what was essentially a pretty small but successful family business. And it was a significant difference. So I would tell you that what they decided to do in the post-election period hampered them for the entire time that they served in the presidency, because, Judy, you cannot catch up. There's too many other things happening. And so to try to redo all the work that had been done in 7 months in 70 days is just impossible. Despite their hubris, they found it impossible, and it set them back significantly with some bad personnel choices. They lost their national security advisor inside the first 30 days of the administration, and it went on from there.
Well, we're here mainly to talk about, obviously, the 2020 to 2021 transition, Professor O'Connell, but I do want you to weigh in for just a moment here on what happened in 2016, from 2016 to 2017, because in some ways, and maybe in big ways, this set the stage for what would happen 4 years later.
Yeah, so if you look at Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk, on the need for personnel in federal agencies, the very first 2 words of Lewis's book are Chris Christie, and describing how the governor recognized the need for transition planning and engaged in it. And when those efforts were discarded, had serious consequences for the functioning of modern government. And so I think there are lessons to be drawn about the importance of transition planning and sort of the repercussions that occurred in 2016, but are prevalent, right, or present sort of in all transitions, and just the need to staff up these agencies.
And to Senator Kaufman, we heard Governor Christie say how positive the cooperation was for them in 2016 from the Obama administration. How did the Biden-Harris transition team find cooperation support from the Trump team in 2020?
Yeah. It's interesting because in the laws that we passed, it created a whole series, as the governor talked about, of landing teams into each one of the different agencies and setting up all those things. And that worked out pretty well until the president found out about it. And then, it lasted longer than I thought it would. Be honest with you, it lasted longer than I thought it would. No, look, a modern presidential transition may be one of the most complex endeavors that human beings can do. And it takes a massive amount of planning, and you have to do it all. I mean, one of the things that I keep talking to people in business, the rest of it, understand, the federal government is the largest, most complex organization in the history of the world. Okay, so I got it. But what you have is you basically have 2 months in which you have to replace the top 1/10 of 1% of the managers. Can you imagine going to General Motors or go to Google or go to one of the companies and say, okay, tell you what, you got 2 months, everybody at the top's gone, we're going to come in and replace all of them and try to make that work. At the same time, where as the United States, every one of our potential problems overseas, our national security exposure is incredible during 2 months, as we've seen by what Putin's doing now. And also what Xi tried to do. So it's an incredible operation. You have to plan it. I compare it to like 1/10 of the difficulty that it takes they took to do D-Day. Just go back and look at what had to be done on D-Day. Everybody can see that and understand it. This thing is, like I say, the most complex challenge ever created by in our history.
Well, and I should say, and we should all point out that your name is on the law, the amendment that changed the transition.
So and it was a dramatic change. I mean, I wrote a law when I was in the Senate, and then I helped on that second law, which my name's on, with a wonderful, wonderful public secretary, Michael Levitt, just one of the very, very best.
How much difference, just quickly, Senator Kaufman, would it have made if there had been more cooperation, more support from the Trump administration at that point?
You know, I'd like to say, I think a lot. You know, I don't know how you get over a lot, but you just don't know. I mean, it's so all so incredibly complex that you don't know. I mean, I absolutely believe, to the bottom of my being, exactly what the governor said, and what the professor said. Just an unmitigated disaster in terms of the 4 years, in terms of creating problems that shadowed the Trump administration for 4 years. But they had so many other problems, as the governor said, turning over your national security advisors. I don't know how many national security advisors they had. They set a record when they stopped counting, when they'd set a record for the short number of national security heads in the first year. So there was so much turmoil and the rest of it. But there's no doubt about it. The governor and the professor are absolutely right. It was key to a lot of the problems that the Trump administration faced.
So, Governor Christie, you were not involved personally. I mean, not involved in an official sense in the transition in 2020, but you certainly were a close observer of it. What do you think might have been? Was there anything that could have been done institutionally to make what we're talking about right now smoother, more truer? To the intention of the law that governs transition.
Well, I think I want to put some more meat on what I think the senator was implying in his comments. Like, I think in the pre-election period, from everything I can observe and frequent conversations I had with Chris Liddell, who was the person inside the administration who was charged with leading the transition efforts, that Chris kind of seemed to have hit all his marks in the pre-election responsibilities. And Ted can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
No.
I think Chris, remember, had been involved as the executive director of the Romney transition, working under Governor Leavitt for Romney. So Chris had a familiarity with what transition should look like. And I think that's why the Trump folks put him in charge in 20 of doing that. And so I think that the law that the senator helped to write worked really well in the pre-election period of 2020, in the very same way it worked really well in the pre-election period of 2016. And this is why I don't think there's anything we can do to change what was the differentiating factor in both 16 and in 20. Because in 16, it was President-elect Trump's acquiescence to Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner's desire to discard the transition and start from scratch themselves. His acquiescence to that is what created the crisis that it lasted for a good part of the next 4 years. And in the very same way, I think if Chris Liddell had been left to his own devices, the transition between the Trump administration and the Biden administration would have gone much more smoothly. But he was ordered by the President of the United States, as I understand it, to not cooperate. Well, you know, Judy, there's nothing we can do, I don't think, from a congressional perspective or any other way, if the President of the United States orders his people not to do certain things. Those people then have two choices: either follow the president's order or quit. But neither one of those things will help make the transition better. And so I think, you know, in the end, one of the things they say in the report here, which is absolutely a truism, but we've seen the results of it over the last two transitions, is whoever is the president is the single most important figure in a presidential transition. And I would not only point to President Obama in 2016, but to President Bush 43 in 2008, who ordered his people to cooperate in every way. And in fact, he and President Obama were making decisions in a cooperative way during the financial crisis that was occurring, and were conferring with each other regularly, because President Bush 43 recognized that President Obama was going to inherit this and was going to have to deal with it, and wanted to try, ironically, to do some of the heavy lifting before President Obama got there, to help give the new president an opportunity to have a cleaner slate coming in. If presidents take that attitude, then all the laws that Ted was involved in writing here, which are good ones, will be implemented. But if presidents want to act in bad faith, then it doesn't matter what law's on the piece of paper. In my view, it won't happen.
Well, you can pick up on that, Professor O'Connell. I want to bring you into this because you study this, you spend a lot of time thinking about this. What about what Governor Christie just said? And I do want to ask you, as you were observing what happened after the election in 2020 and former President Trump's refusal to accept the results and what we saw on January the 6th, and just, I mean, what many people would say was a train wreck of a post-election period, much of which continues to this day. How different is that from, I mean, just lay it out for us. How different was that from the way things normally work?
So I think the last transition was quite different. And the report does a fascinating job just detailing all the different factors that the Biden-Harris team confronted. As you mentioned, right? You had the January 6th insurrection, which followed by a subsequent impeachment trial of President Trump, right? In the initial days of the Biden administration, you had a COVID-19 pandemic, which continues. You had a racial reckoning, as the report describes, of continued police killings of Black men and women. And there were so many different factors which made it incredibly difficult, though I do want to flag two things that, as an observer of transitions and as someone who often is saying, oh, you're too slow at nominations, you're too slow at confirmations, two things that struck me about the transition in 2020 to 2021. So the first was the team not only talked about the need to have agency leaders who reflect America, and Bill Clinton had talked about that as well, but they actually made it happen. And so you saw the emphasis on diversifying the leadership ranks of the federal bureaucracy, and you saw it play out, right? So many firsts, right? The first Black Secretary of Defense, the first female Secretary of the Treasury, the first openly transgender person confirmed by the Senate. And of course, finding people to come into government who were not in government before. So, haven't done the forms, haven't done the vetting, weren't part of the in and outers, right? That takes more time, and that does cause delays in seeing nominations get formally submitted. But I was struck by the demographics of the people being put forward to lead the government. And then the second thing I was struck by, and was mentioned briefly by Senator Kaufman, was the transition's role on acting officials, basically. So to have temporary leaders who could start implementing the new administration's policy while the traditional appointment system, which is broken, and we'll talk more about that, but while that traditional appointments process churns. And so the team put in political allies in many non-confirmed, what are called first assistant positions under the 1998 Vacancies Act, which allowed these appointees who were not Senate confirmed to take on the Senate confirmed jobs in an acting capacity without any additional presidential action under the Vacancies Act. And so sort of staffing up the acting officials to be ready to go, and then also staffing up outside of acting officials, sort of non-confirmed other political appointments, just to get people in place outside of the traditional process, also struck me as a very good thing that the transition did.
Senator Kaufman, I think a lot of people, I mean, again, following on what we've just heard from Professor O'Connell, a lot of people are struck by the fact that the Biden transition was able to get this done despite what was going on. I mean, how was that working inside your process? I mean, what was it like? Take us inside.
We had talent again. We get back to that talented people. We had people involved that knew the federal government inside, outside, every which way. So they really knew what they were doing. And we asked a lot, talked to people like the governor did of previous transitions. But like, for instance, one of the things was, in addition to what the professor said, we were trying to fill spots, we actually went around and talked to people who were thinking about retiring who were assistant secretaries or down the line in an agency, and then convincing them to stay, and convincing people who were what they call non-career SESs qualified to fill vacancies. I mean, we literally set up people in each one of the federal agencies on our staff to go and talk to them about who's the best person, what's going on, how do you get them to stay? Because we knew the confirmation thing was going to be a train wreck because of the incumbent president, and because of basically the approach that the Republicans in the Senate have taken to do anything. I mean, Mitch McConnell started the whole thing. I was saying, I'm going to spend 100% of my time trying to figure out how to stop Joe Biden from accomplishing anything. And he was being very, very truthful in terms of what their efforts was. So you had to do all these things, Judy, if you had any chance to make progress.
Specifically, those, Senator Cobb, not though, but in addition to that, specifically the difficulty in getting to ascertainment, what's called this technical term,
Yeah.
but it is important. Explain to us why it's important and what obstacles that presented.
Yeah, well, ascertainment is essentially, it used to be, it's just functional. It's kind of like the January 6th thing. We just did it. It was like, there was a problem during Bush or, okay, but it just happened. And, what the president did, like he does all these things, as the governor pointed out in terms of the entire thing. We got somebody here that has to approve it, the federal government. So the head of OMB has to basically say, there were a lot of things in my law. One of the big things in my law was that on the day after Election Day, you could have people go into the agencies. You could have people, they'd have staff, they'd have offices, they'd have equipment. All those things were set up in my law, and so that people could actually get started right after Election Day when they were. But it based on the fact that you had to get ascertainment in order to do it. But the bigger thing we had, which, as the governor pointed out, and we just had lined all these people up. I mean, they were all lined up, ready to go. They didn't go anywhere. It just delayed the amount of time we had for them to move into their offices, for their time to go. The landing teams meet with the agency director, councils, people in each one of the districts. I mean, it's an incredible process now that we have, where, as the governor said, when you come in, you can send people into every one of the agencies and meet with people on the agencies who are ready for you with books and how you have to do and define what it is. So that all works great. And I think, he just had to wait, and it just, instead of starting when we could have started, had to start later. But that's the way, that's the way it was.
And Governor Christie, in 2020, what happened, or after the election, was and as we moved into 2021, some of the agencies were beginning to cooperate, but some, like defense and others, where you had particular Trump loyalists, if you will, at the helm, who didn't want to see cooperation. I mean, I know what you said a minute ago, unless the president wants to go along with this, it's not going to happen, but is there a way around that kind of agency by agency willingness to be part of this process?
Judy, I don't know. I don't think there is, if you have resistance from the president, because those people, as I said earlier, have two pretty clear choices: follow the order of the president of the United States or quit. And either one of those alternatives, when the order from the president is not to cooperate, don't solve the problem that the senator and his team were facing in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Now, let's face it, this is not normal, but not unprecedented. And if you look at each time that it's happened in our history, Buchanan to Lincoln, Hoover to FDR, Truman to Eisenhower, it was because of some personal animus by the outgoing president towards the incoming president. And each one of those times, and that's only 4 instances that I'm aware of, where there was real resistance to the process, in addition to the Trump resistance. But even then, with no laws at their disposal, they couldn't overcome it. And I think it's very difficult to overcome that when the person in charge is directly ordering people to not cooperate and refusing to concede the election, making ascertainment a much more cumbersome and difficult process. And so you know, in the very same way that, you know, I don't think you could make a law that would have said if your transition is been working from April to November and produced product, the incoming president can't fire the transition team, you know, between November and January. Well, you know, there's no way you could do that. And I think there's little or no way that I could think of to avoid it if there's presidential opposition.
Professor O'Connell, what about that? What are the lessons of history? I mean, we heard Governor Christie cite previous transitions where there was difficulty. He said often, if not always, due to personal animus. Is there any way around? I mean, what are the lessons there? And do you see a way around it? If the outgoing president himself or herself in the future is not prepared to cooperate, to go along, how do you make it? How do you make a difference?
Well, I think the governor is correct to a large degree. I mean, these men and women serve the president. And so if the president gives orders to stymie cooperative efforts for the transition, that's going to be a problem. But I think you can put some guardrails in place. I think the report details some. One that struck me is that currently there's a decent amount tied to the ascertainment decision by the General Services Administration. So could Congress peel off some of that from the ascertainment decision so you could get funding, for example, going to both teams prior to an ascertainment decision? I mean, in the realm of government funding, the amount of funding in terms that ties to ascertainment is not a huge amount. And the benefits to that in terms of good government may compel that. So I definitely favor kind of peeling off items from political decisions or decisions that could be influenced by political actors. And then second, I think there's the need for contingency planning. I mean, because it's just not ascertainment. Because if you go back to 2000, where we had this razor thin margin in one key state, right, which is not the case in 2020, but in 2000, we have one state. The GSA's determination was delayed until December 13th, the day after the Supreme Court sided with Bush over Gore in the Florida recount fight. And so it was kind of an even longer delay in ascertainment, but President George W. Bush still beat out his predecessor, Bill Clinton, in terms of agency nominations and just barely in confirmations by the end of December of the first year. But there wasn't also a pandemic or a financial crisis or racial reckoning and all these other factors. And so I think the transition teams also have to plan for these contingencies that will come up sort of outside of ascertainment.
Senator Kaufman, come back to this fundamental question about what can be done if the incumbent is not prepared to cooperate.
Well, we know one thing: having the head of the GSA make the decision is not. I mean, I felt so bad for her. I really did. I mean, it was like, whoa, this is like. So you need something other than that. I think that probably the Congress, I mean, is going to start looking. There are some other options. I don't know what they are and how they work, but it will not be hard to come up with something that's better than the present system. Whether it's a system that will work, whether it's a system we can get through Congress, that is the professor and the governor both pointed out. That's an incredibly difficult. That's a big lift for him. But I think I think smart people sitting down come up with a better system we have now. But again, as the governor and professor both said, if you got an incoming president, you got an incumbent president that's still in power, I don't know.
Well, Governor
Pick
Christie,
better presidents, I think. I don't know.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you. Say that again.
I said pick better presidents. Maybe that's.
Governor Christie, so let's move this forward. How do we, what needs to be done? You've all referred to this, but what needs to be done to make this a process that works better for the country going forward? What are the essential steps that need to be taken? And that's what's in this report, this set of recommendations, but what's your take on that?
But Judy, I think that most of the framework for doing an effective transition is there in the laws that the Congress has passed, and in the spirit of most of the people who are inside the government. I found with the Obama administration, now granted, they were not defeated, and so it makes it a little bit easier, but their candidate was defeated, and they clearly were very supportive of Senator Clinton. So it wasn't like there was joy in the White House that the Trump administration was going to be coming in, not the Clinton administration, but the spirit of almost every one of the people that I interacted with and my team interacted with found them to be willing, able, and ready to be able to help us get to where we needed to get to and get the information we needed. I think that one of the things that is incredibly vital, and the senator brought this up before, is having a very talented, broad group of people who will take the transition seriously. So let me give you, for instance, from the Trump experience in 2016. Right before the second debate, as everyone will remember, there was the Access Hollywood tape and the significant crisis inside the Trump campaign. And I think there were many people, both inside the Trump campaign and outside, who thought at that point there was no way after that tape that Donald Trump could win. I recognize this, and so that Monday, after the weekend of the tape and the debate, I traveled to the office in Washington, and I said, look, if there's anybody here who doesn't believe they can continue to do their work, I want you to tender your resignations today, and there'll be no penalty involved with it. But everybody else who stays needs to understand that whether Donald Trump wins or not, our obligation is to put together the very best transition, preparation, and planning we can have, because he may win, and if he does, he'll need it to be effective. And if he doesn't win, it will be a great blueprint for whoever comes after us in 2020 to use as a starting point. So either way, your work here is not useless. And it really, the people stayed together. No one resigned. Everyone continued to do their work. And that's why we had the 20-volume report we had to turn over to the president-elect on the day after the election. So I think the quality of the people you bring in, how you empower them, all will help to make the transition process better. But you need to take that seriously from early spring of the year of the election all the way through until the inauguration.
Senator Kaufman,
Yes.
I want you to pick up on that and
Sure.
talk about what needs to be done to ensure that the hard work of the transition, all this work that you and Governor Christie have been referring to, does transfer into a smooth and efficient personnel. You both have talked about the importance of people, making sure you got the right people in place
Right.
and quickly. How do you make sure that happens?
Well, I think it's really just hard work. I mean, one of the incredible advantages we had is Joe Biden was probably the most experienced person in the federal government elected president of the United States in history. I mean, 36 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president. That was incredibly helpful to us. If you look at why we were able to do this, because you didn't have to bring him up to speed. I can't imagine being in the Oval Office with a brand new president who had even been a governor and trying to explain a major foreign policy crisis. In terms of how watching dealing with Obama was fantastic, but it must have been incredibly difficult for him when this first discussion when the generals came in. So it's laid out there. I mean, I think I think it's a good plan. I think it's with all these things. I mean, the governor said it over and over again, and he can't say it enough, is if you have a president of the United States that decides they don't want to have a decent transition, that's the way our democracy works. I mean, there's nothing you can do to change what that person wants to do. Now, again, if you're leaving office, it's a little easier, so they make it harder, on the incoming president, as he did for Biden. But again, as I said, you put your whole plan together, it slows the whole thing down. It doesn't give you momentum and the rest of that. But I think you look, we got held up for ascertainment, and I think most of our basic plan that we had in terms of personnel, in terms of policy, in terms of those things, really was implemented.
I want to stay with you for just a second,
Sure.
Senator Kaufman, though, on this whole idea of getting people in place, the appointment process, the confirmation process. There are very clear recommendations in here for
Right.
what needs to be done to
Yes.
improve that. How do you see that?
No, absolutely. I mean, we've seen the confirmation process, and we know. I mean, everybody talks about, like, compare Obama's to Biden in terms of how many passed. I was in the caucus. We had 59 and 60 Democratic senators. If you can't get confirmations with 59 and 60 Democratic senators, but we still didn't. We still weren't as good as it used to be back in the days when Democrats and Republicans would join hands and help, get people confirmed. So, if you can't, you can't do that. So I think comparing all these things, if you look at them and this is where the partnership, one of the many, many things the partnership does so well, they do the analysis. They show you that if somebody had 15, more confirmed people, it may be because of the situation that was involved. But what President Biden was faced with a 50-50, it is incredibly difficult to get people's confirmed. If the other team decides, which they did, that we're just going to stop you. I mean, I said it before, having 40 U.S. ambassadors held up at a time when we're facing these incredible national security challenges, one person did that. I mean, one person with the support of his caucus basically did that. So again, it is incredibly difficult based on what your situation is. And I think the proposals by the partnership are excellent in terms of being able to deal with it. But the first thing is, they used to say in business school, is you got to define the problem. And the problem is our confirmation system is broke, especially in a society where the two parties are at hammers and tongs with each other, and there's no cooperation coming from the opposing party in the House and Senate to the president.
Governor Christie, you agree with that? Talk about the confirmation process. And again, the report spells out some pretty clear reforms that need to happen. What needs to change to make sure that incoming administrations have a strong team in place as quickly as possible?
Look, the problem is that both parties, when they are in the minority from the White House, feel as if in recent times that their job is to make the job of the president as difficult as possible. And there isn't the spirit in the Senate any longer of trying to say, we need to help the president be successful. I can tell you, as a governor, I had a Democratic Senate for all 8 years that I was governor. And we had our confirmation fights. But, for instance, the Senate president in New Jersey's attitude was, as a Democrat, the governor is entitled to his cabinet. And the governor is entitled to have his senior people. And unless we find something out about them in our process that is, ethically disqualifying, we're going to give the governor who he wants, even though we may not agree with that person. I don't think there's that spirit anymore on either side of the aisle in the United States Senate. And I think as long as there isn't that spirit, and I'm talking about particularly in the leadership, where the people will make these decisions. And as the senator said, in the instance of the ambassadors, you had one senator who held up all of those folks for a policy reason, but one that was not necessarily directly connected to the individuals who were being nominated. So I think that in this instance, it would help to narrow the number of Senate confirmed appointees? Absolutely, that would be helpful. And as someone who's an executive branch guy, I'm all for that. I'm sure some legislative branch folks wouldn't be as for it as I would be. But I do think there also has to be a change in spirit in the leadership positions in the Senate regarding what the president is entitled to because of his victory nationwide and what he isn't.
We're getting so much more I'd love to explore here. We're down to, I think, about 5 minutes left. So I want to come back to you, Professor O'Connell, on whether it's the appointments process, having fewer confirmations required, whatever. What are the main things that you believe should happen and realistically can happen to ensure that there's as strong as possible transition process in the future going forward?
So I would focus on two things. The first and the most important, and maybe the least politically feasible, is to cut the number of Senate confirmed positions. So a recent study by David Lewis and Mark Richardson looked at the last 3 completed administrations, so George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump. And on average, they didn't make a single nomination in their first 2 years for nearly 30% of Senate confirmed agency positions that they were able to fill. So we need to be able to come to some agreement. Congress did come to agreement for about 160 positions in 2012 to eliminate Senate confirmation, but that would be the most important thing that could happen. You asked the governor and the senator about how to get the transition planning to work into the administration. I think we should expect less of the transition and sort of have fewer Senate confirmed positions. Now, some of those should go to president only appointments, but some of those should go to senior career workers in the federal government, which would take the transitions out of it. And then the second thing, which I think is perhaps more feasible, and both the governor and the senator talked about this, is we need more cooperation on at least some of these appointments. Right now, on the left and the right, a vote on an assistant secretary becomes a symbol of party fealty. And so some of those votes need to be votes of fealty, but not all of those votes need to be votes of party loyalty. And so President George Herbert Walker Bush and Clinton had 378 and 194 agency nominations, respectively, approved by unanimous consent. George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden in their first year, none. And so we need to at least come up with a set of nominations, maybe in the national security space, where we fast track them. We don't allow these individual holds, as we saw by one senator on ambassadors, but we saw holds by other senators on US attorneys and other nominations in President Biden's first year. We need some more cooperation to at least get certain jobs filled faster.
We only got about a minute or so left each for you, Senator Kaufman and Governor Christie. But Senator Kaufman, I want to use that time you can respond to what Professor.
Yeah.
O'Connell said.
Look, let me get, and I'm for what's in the report. I'm for vetting disclosure. I'm for reducing number of appointments. But if you look at it from the Senate side, they basically said, well, the President of the United States will not respond to anything you ask for. And the only way you can get the president's attention is through the nominations process. That, it's a terrible way to do it. But let me tell you, if you're sitting in the Senate, you're on the Foreign Relations Committee, and there's a very important issue, and you can't get the president's attention to it, and the only way you can do it is a confirmation. So you're going to have trouble with the Congress agreeing to these changes.
Governor Christie, it looks like you're going to get the last word here. But
Well, I mean, look, let's face it. I think the senator's absolutely right. It takes an increased spirit on both sides of the executive branch to acknowledge the appropriateness of congressional oversight and to not encourage the Senate to bastardize the nomination process in order to perform their oversight function. But think about this. I think the spirit of it's even more important than that. Antonin Scalia, the late justice, got 99 votes for confirmation. Can we imagine anyone that either Joe Biden or any Republican could nominate today for the United States Supreme Court who would get 99 votes? Antonin Scalia got those 99 votes because back then, the way people made those judgments was, excuse me, it's not do I agree with him? It is he qualified? And we have moved away from, on the question of nominations, is he or she qualified, to do I agree with them? And if that spirit doesn't change within the United States Senate, then you're not going to be able to pass any law that will make the confirmation process any better, in my view.
And I believe Justice Breyer got something like 97, but you're right. The process has changed so dramatically. Well, I cannot thank each one of you enough. Governor Christie, Senator Kaufman, Professor O'Connell, just it was so important to hear your observations and your contributions to this conversation, your comments on the report. We all know how important transitions are, why they matter. They are fundamental to a democracy, the peaceful transfer, and the fact that we don't have blood in the streets or something close, in as much as looking back on last January the 6th. But they are a hallmark of our democracy. I do want to thank the Partnership for Public Service for all the work you do on this, the Boston Consulting Group, all the work that you do. But thank you, everybody involved. I just want to thank all who tuned in. Thank you for your great questions. I was able to incorporate them into our conversation. Please read this report, share it. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a good day.